All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 390. That seems like, it makes it seem like we've done a lot.
We've done over 2,000 episodes,
True.
folks. I have them
Just
all
not
archived.
all of them HBR Talk. But that is true between all the different shows we do. But welcome to HBR Talk 390. Does this manosphere seem kind of small to you? And I picked the title this time specifically because of last week's revelation that the writer wasn't discussing us. She was just lumping us in with the people that she was discussing who are only a fraction of the manosphere. I am your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson.
Hello.
Hello. We have Richard coming back to continue to discuss the media's attack on incels for being lonely. Hello, Richard. And we have Brian working in the background to make everything happen, because I still haven't got my act together to learn everything I need to do to maintain the vertical chat. Our vertical show. So there we go. You have your prime example here of a woman relying on help from a man. Feminists wouldn't like me very much, but I am very grateful. But before we get into our show, we got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. But with that out of the way, I want to start out because we could have new listeners. We could have the same listeners. With the vertical show, we quite frequently get people that we haven't had before. With some definitions, because this individual, this writer here, which I'll scroll back to the top, the article is titled "The Incel Trap." So,
Lol.
Yeah, she starts out saying she's writing about incels. Yeah, lol. But then she goes into Reddit's men's rights subreddit, which is not about incels per se. It's a men's rights subreddit. The discussions in the men's rights subreddit are more about things like due process in criminal court, fair treatment in family court, the boy crisis in education, where boys are falling behind instead of keeping up. And a lot of that is because of the ways that education has changed, where discovery learning is being thrown by the wayside by rote learning and things like that, and also political propaganda, which doesn't provide any useful benefit to the kids. And then, of course, she gets into the manosphere, which the manosphere, here we go, she defines incorrectly as a loose group of men who promote misogyny and anti-feminism online, which that's baloney. And I believe pointed that out.
So Hannah, either you are not part of the manosphere, or you are a man, and it's been 0 days.
0 days. Yep. Just post the meme. 0 days since I've been called a man again. All of us, though, like every woman in the manosphere, the so-called manosphere, it's the manosphere is essentially a loose group of different discussions and sets of activism and I guess camaraderie, communication, and so on around issues affecting men and boys. And so it includes men's rights activists who want to ensure that mothers and fathers get equal treatment in court instead of one getting custody all the time and the other getting shut out of the child's life, because kids need their fathers and dads need to raise their kids. And then you have guys who are pickup artists, completely different group of guys. You have incels, again, another completely different group of guys. Then you have men going their own way, another completely different group of guys. Guys that call themselves red pillars, who are often more about traditionalism than specifically men's rights, but believe that there is there's an attack on masculinity. And as a men's rights activist, I will agree that there is, because feminists have said they want to feminize men and boys. And as a result, they've changed the education system. They've made demands for change in law and policy, both in government and in the corporate world. They've changed how the field of psychology works, how therapy is or is not available. So it is quite reasonable to say there's an attack on masculinity, but traditionalist conservatives and men's rights activists, while there's some overlap, are not all the same group. The men's rights movement, in addition to traditionalist conservatives, includes independents like me, includes anarcho-capitalists like me, basically people who pretty much have decided the government really can't do anything right. And if the people want any protection at all, eternal vigilance is the only answer. You have communists, a few communists. I know a few communists in the movement. We butt heads on things all the time because I'm very anti-communism, but we still are able to agree that if something is a human right, that it's no less a man's right than that of a woman. We have in the movement, there are people that are semi-woke. I don't think we have any super woke leftists that are really actively men's rights activists, because it kind of, the super woke left really hates men in general.
The Tin Man and Lisa Burton.
They're probably as close as you can get.
We've had all sorts over the years, going all the way back to 2014. There have been
earlier even
way earlier. There have been some people who have tried to get involved in the men's rights movement, but because they're a little bit left leaning, like it only takes them a year or two before they're like, this is too right wing for me. I have to go because they disagree with other adjacent issues.
I can name names.
I could name several names, but we don't need to do that.
No. The sad thing is, I mean, if you really want to name names, one of the earliest men's rights activists that's known to be a men's rights activist, somebody who talked about the importance of equal treatment under the law and the damaging effects of unequal treatment between men and women, where a woman can make an allegation and a man's defense is compromised by the state accommodating her embarrassment or accommodating her feelings in some way or another. That would have been Ernest Belfort Bax. And he talked about a bunch of different things, but one of the things that he brought up was in no relation to us, the Badger game. And there was the Badger game and the honey trap. And the honey trap It was, if I remember right, the honey trapping is a woman getting a guy into a compromising position and then claiming to be a victim of that situation and using it for blackmail of some sort, or otherwise taking advantage. Like the CIA uses honey traps to catch
Honeypot.
people. Yeah, honeypots.
It's called the honeypot.
Yep, the honeypot. Whereas the badger game, in a way, that's kind of similar, but it involves things like breach of promise to marry. And I would have to look up. There's a good discussion on it, an article on it, on unknownmisandry.blogspot.com. I believe it's a .com, because I think all the blog spots are .com, and that blog has quite a bit of information about some misconceptions that people have, like violent people can be male or female, serial killers can be male or female, all types of criminality can be perpetrated by male or female criminals, and there are examples on there from news stories to prove it, and also about the history of law and policy on domestic violence. People think that that was invented in the 70s, but it actually, the 1970s, but actually goes back to like the 13th century. So,
and just to clarify, even way back in the Gamergate days, and long before that, but specifically in the Gamergate days, it became obvious that there was this vendetta against straight, white, cisgendered Christian males. Like it all came together in Gamergate, but it's been going on since, well, it's been going on noticeably since the 90s, and it's been going on since long before that in what we call the Frankfurt School. You will have to look that shit up for yourself, because it's always been there. But like I said about all these, there are some people who aligned themselves with the men's rights movement because they realized that men were being discriminated against on this kind of basis. But then once it developed, they were like, oh yeah, but it's not happening to white people or straight people or cisgendered people or Christians. No,
insert demographic here.
None of that is happening. Even though it was made clear to us during Gamergate that these are the series of demographics that are being lumped together as the Untermensch. It's just that for some reason there were some men who were only interested in the fact that they as men were being discriminated against. But then when it came to the white thing and the straight thing and the cisgendered thing and the Christian thing, they were like, no, that's going too far. Even though it's been made clear that this is happening. And yeah, this is an unfortunate truth that we have to encounter. There are some men that only came to the men's rights movement because of personal things that were happening to them, possibly because of things that happened in the family courts, possibly because of things that had happened with the women in their life. And I don't know how to pussyfoot around this because, I don't want to ad hominem any men that happen to have encountered, things in their personal life, but that has happened. Like, when they only encounter things that happen in their own personal life, but once those issues get fixed in their own personal life, they're like, oh, well, that is not important to me anymore. That thing's been fixed. And the fact that you were still talking about white people and straight people and cisgender people and Christians, that doesn't matter to me anymore because that's not affecting me in my life anymore. And this is people tend to push back on the things that aren't happening to them, and they tend to there's so many people who try to be different for the sake of being different. And that's what brought about the Frankfurt School in the first place. That I'm just being I encountered the things around me, and I push back on those things.
Yeah.
And as
Each of
long
us, in our own way, ended up in the movement after encountering things that demonstrated there was a problem. And then slowly, like, everybody talks about the red pill the moment you realized that the system isn't working the way that it should be working. Like, the equal treatment under the law is not happening, that the family court system is a mess, that the education system is not serving either sex of child very well, but they're doing even worse for boys than they are for girls, and all that. But I think for a lot of us, it was almost like more like a red IV, and it was a very slow drip. Um, as we started figuring out over the course of years that, gosh, some of these laws are written in a very discriminatory way. Like, laws on intimate partner violence, on family violence, have become gendered. So if the person who is a victim is male, he has less recourse, and there are less avenues for him to get help. He may not be able to get any justice in the court system. If he has children with his abuser, he may lose custody. He may have to worry that his abuser has custody of his children. When that happens to women, everybody gets all up in arms, right? Everybody recognizes that these are circumstances that should not be happening. That the victim of the abuse should be able to get out of the home. That if there is a perpetrator of abuse in the home, that person should not be the one in charge of the children, and that if there's proof of abuse, escaping that shouldn't break the bank for the individual that's getting out of that situation. Um, that shouldn't matter whether the victim is the wife or the husband, but it does. And that's sort of where I came in. That and false allegations, because I dealt with that case that's titled 7 Years in Hell in the article that I wrote about it on A Voice for Men, voiceformen.com. But there were other instances that I had witnessed, and they all seem to revolve around the gendering in the Violence Against Women Act. And none of that kind of thing happened under Ronald Reagan's Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. If somebody was abusing their father or their mother or their son or their daughter, their husband, their wife, anyone in their household, their brother, their sister, they were all treated equally under the law. They were all treated, the victim was treated with compassion. The perpetrator was treated as an individual who needed treatment for a behavioral disorder, because any adult that handles conflict with violence is in need of either education that helps them mature, or treatment for a behavioral disorder.
and to continue my thought, some people are just iconoclastic. They push back on whatever seems normal to them, and a lot of people, especially young people, because they're naturally rebellious, find themselves surrounded by this left-wing feminist ideology, but they are able to escape into this community, this enclave, this online enclave of men's rights advocates, of people who reject the feminist dogma. But then once they find themselves entrenched in that community, that becomes the norm. And so then they see the men's rights advocate community as the norm. And so then, because they are natural rebellious iconoclasts, they go, well, now that this is the thing I'm surrounded by, I have to push back against that. And they completely forget that the media and the education system and the government around them are still dyed-in-the-wool feminists, but they don't care about that anymore, because the community in which they've embedded themselves is now the norm, and they lose track of the whole of the perspective on that, as whatever is subjectively normal to them becomes their enemy. And this is what we encounter year over year. It's people who want new things, who want novelty, and then they get bored of the novelty, and so they extract themselves back into the original thing that was always the thing that pushed them into the into the outlier movement in the first place.
Yeah.
And this is it's difficult, but it's important to figure out the difference between people who reject things just because they're normal and people who reject things because they're fucking wrong. And this is why
Exactly.
Honey Badger Radio has been going for a dozen years and more, because we're not just rejecting this because it's normal. We're rejecting it because it is the overlying, all-encompassing dogma, and it's always been wrong, and that's never changed. Even when Trump got in power for the first term, even when Trump got in power for the second term, there are people pushing back on Trump now because he's not doing enough and because he's doing some pretty mad shit, and they're like, well, it's the same in any other given country. We've got all this fucking infighting in the UK between Reform and Restore, and it's hard to cut through all these iconoclasts who are just being different for the sake of being different, and the
It's fun
people.
to see though.
It's fun to see, but you know, you have to get your eyes on the prize. Yeah, you have to actually keep broadening your perspective to what is actually fucking up our countries, and it's still not the right wing. Despite all the shit that Trump is doing, all the bad shit that is happening in America is because of the left wing. Despite what Reform or Restore are talking about doing, all the bad shit happening in the UK is because of the left wing. And I call it left wing reductively, but you know what I'm talking about. It's fucking there are people who will there are political tourists, you know, who will go from movement to movement because it feels like the most novel thing, and it's hard to tell them apart when they first get into it. But it's eventually you'll notice them because they'll just hop from side to side because they're bored.
It's like being a Blade Runner for people to hop on to the latest trend.
Yeah. And the sad thing is, you get people who come to the movement that are in crisis as well, and sometimes they come in because of an event in their demographic or their community. In 2011, there was an incident that has been forever referred to as Elevator Gate, in which a member of the atheist skeptic community went on a huge rant about sexism in the atheist skeptic community. And after she gave her speech about this, some guy asked if she would like to talk more about it over coffee. He really was interested in her ideas. And she took it to mean that he was inviting her for romance, for lack of a better term. And he didn't say that, but it was something that she assumed, and it divided the atheist skeptic community, and we got this influx from the atheist skeptic community into the men's rights movement, and they were fine for a while, and then they discovered that there were actually a lot of conservative Christians in the men's rights movement, and there was a knockdown, drag out internet slap fight between the atheists, especially the ones I would label anti-theists, because there's two types. There's people who are perfectly satisfied to just not be involved in religion, and then there's people who get offended that those of us who are religious, those of us who are Christian, are involved in religion, and so they get heated. And I had my fair share of arguments with people in that slap fight. And it was essentially, standing my ground for people's right to make their own choices. And I'm not going to tell them they can't be a men's rights activist if they're atheist, but they can't tell me I can't, push for better law and better policies that treat both sexes equally, just because I'm not atheist. So, that was one of many instances. But so what this lady is doing when she is condensing um, the entire movement down to pickup artists and incels is she is ignoring most of the issues that men face, right? Being stuck in a position of not being able to make the relationship you want with a partner isn't the only issue that men face. It's a big issue. It's contributing to many of the health crises that men are experiencing, including the suicide crisis, but it isn't alone. Right? It stands right alongside of men losing contact with their children because the court system that favors mothers doesn't protect children's right to be raised by both parents, or fathers' right to raise their children and protect and nurture them. It only protects mothers. And it stands right alongside men who go through ordeals where they're dragged through the bowels of the court system for 7 years, or in the case of one of my friends, 20 years, because when a woman decides to accuse a man of something that's a violation of any part of the Violence Against Women Act, if she lies, if the allegation itself is a lie, if she commits process crimes like perjury, the system is designed so that she can't be held accountable for that. And so there's no deterrent to stop that. So even though the issue of domestic violence affects both sexes, when the person making the allegation is a psychopath or a sociopath or has some other reason why they're lying, uniquely in the case of female liars, they get away with it. And the victim of those lies doesn't have any recourse. And he might actually go to jail, sometimes for years, without having done anything wrong. Like those issues stand right alongside men's relationship issues. But it's a lot easier for feminists to smear men by holding up a few examples from within the relationship issues discussion, and people who consider themselves to be, they don't do anything for men, but they consider themselves to be men's rights activists, but really they're white nationalists, or like this individual that she's talking to in the article. When I looked up the account of the first individual that she mentioned, he was a pretty obvious troll, not somebody who is engaged in serious discussion, trying to solve problems. I didn't see any recent posts in the men's rights subreddit that were this guy, talking about men's issues and stuff. And I didn't see any prominent participation at all there with him. So this is somebody, this individual that wrote this looked for somebody to smear us with. And they won't talk. I guarantee you this article is not going to bring us up much. If they talk about us at all, I don't remember seeing us in it when I skimmed it. They're not going to talk about people who write to their legislators and point out that if you incentivize divorce, you get more divorce, and that it's better to not incentivize divorce in law. They're not going to talk about people who write to their legislators and suggest it's very important, given the known benefits of father involvement, that our system not be designed to deter father involvement in a child's life. They're going to write about people who are mad that something happened to them, or something happened to somebody they know, and are going off about it, and they'll take them out of context. Or they're going to write about trolls, or they're going to write about people who are who have a misguided attitude about getting along with other people of different races, and decide that being being unified with having a sense of unity with your roots means that you have to be vain about it and angry at everybody else who isn't part of that. Um, and they'll find something that they've said that they might remotely connect with us, and that's who they'll talk about, because they don't want to try to argue with us about the real issues. If they do, they'll expose themselves as anti-male bigots who are trying to maintain a system that a lot of grifters are making a lot of money on. For example, in the domestic violence victims advocacy industry, there are shelters that help people, and then there are organizations that they'll have a shelter and they're constantly raising money for it, but the bulk of that financing goes to 6 board members that meet 5 times a year and don't do anything. And you have to be careful with that with any charity. But they want to protect the ability to do that because a lot of them make a lot of money off of it. So that's what we're looking at right here. So when we see these definitions, the manosphere is this, right? This is what incels are, and so on. What we read previously after the description of the manosphere and the statement about victimhood and so on, you notice as you go through this article, this is more about poisoning the water and deciding what you're allowed to think about us than it is about giving you information so you can decide what you think about us. But I think we stopped last week at the end of this paragraph where they tried to associate us with a few killers. And our next bit here is the bit about radicalization. And I take issue with the term radicalization too, because that can just be used as a thought terminating cliche, right? If all you say is, I disagree, someone can come back to you and say, oh, it's because you're being radicalized, right?
Where it could just be de-radicalization. Mm-hmm. In most cases, that's all it is. Yeah.
We need to de-radicalize you. We have the right to take your property, money you earned, or your car, your house, your land, whatever, if you have any, because we're going to give it to group X that has suffered indignity Y throughout their history, and this is to help them get back on their feet. I disagree. Well, you're being radicalized. You've been radicalized, right? That's you saying, no, my boundaries are here, stop. And them saying, oh, you can't have boundaries, you're being radicalized. Yeah. So it's similar with misogyny, right? We get told that misogyny is hatred of women, but most of the time when I see somebody called a misogynist, it's because he or she criticized a behavior that men cannot get away with without being criticized. But the person engaging in the behavior was a woman. And since the perpetrator of the behavior was female, the criticism is of a woman. Suddenly he's a misogynist or she's a misogynist for saying that. Even though what's being said ultimately is women cannot have equal accountability to men. And so a lot of these terms that get used against us are thought terminating cliches. There may be a logical way to use that term. You're radicalized if you start thinking it's okay to engage in violence against other people over mere political disagreement. Right? They're not coming to you and doing things to you. They're not taking your house. They're not taking your car. They're not assaulting you in the street. They're not breaking in and so on. But you're going to do it because you're justified. You're on the right side of history. You've done something to solve a problem, whatever. when you've bypassed the normal civic means, writing to politicians, sharing ideas in the public forum, contacting media and getting coverage of the issue, or becoming media and covering it yourself. And you know, you're radicalized if you start considering violence. Like if we decided that instead of having a conference every year and seeing what ways we in our communities could help men, if we decided we were going to take to the streets and set fire to neighborhoods, as Antifa has done, that would be radicalization. But we get called radicalized, right? We get called radicalized for suggesting that if something is a heinous act that men should never get away with doing, then women shouldn't get away with it either. That's what we get called radicalized for.
Nor should the men who have been recruited into women's emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
Which covers quite a lot of things, more than seem intuitive.
Yeah, if you're an adult, you should not let another adult talk you into doing something stupid, even if they're very persuasive, very attractive, you know, and so on. Just like it's not possible for a woman or a man to be groomed into a relationship or into sex. But women do often claim that they have been groomed into it. No, not if you're an adult. If you're a kid, that's different. Kids are not emotionally or psychologically mature enough to handle any kind of discussion like that. They can't fight back intellectually if somebody's conning them. An adult can. Right? A capable adult can do that. But so again, like as I look at this, radicalization is another buzzword that it just means what they want it to mean in the moment. So she says, I wanted to meet in real life the men who post misogyny online to understand their hatred. So this tells you the outlook she had when she went looking for the people she was going to meet with, and then when she talked to them, she already had a bias. She'd already made her decision, and she already knew what she was going to tell you about them. And starting out, she went with Alex. Alex is on Reddit as Fems are the gender KKK. That's fair. That's a fair name. Fems are the gender KKK is commentary on feminism. And the reason that a lot of men's rights activists compare feminists to the KKK is because they support because they are the KKK. They support a lynch mob style of behavior of response to accusations against men.
In theory, they're the same, but the KKK only existed for a few decades before they got their asses handed to them.
And they're kind of a joke now.
And they were never able to enter, political discourse, let alone political power. Feminists came on the scene, and they were immediately ushered into political discourse and political power.
Yeah. By the Ford Foundation.
It's the difference between a kitten and a fucking lion. Yeah. Feminism is the lion. And,
by the Rockefellers too, by the way. Ford Foundation, the Rockefellers, several very wealthy organizations started by highly successful individuals. The KKK, historically, they had their power in segments of the United States for a long time. And you can trace the origins of the Democrat Party back to the KKK. It's not that the KKK started the Democrat Party, but the people who started the Democrat Party and the people who were members of the KKK in the South, if you did a Venn diagram, it would almost be all the same color. There you wouldn't be able to see very much that wasn't overlap, and that was then. Right? Now the KKK is a laughingstock. The Democrat Party is kind of a laughingstock right now too. So you have sort of a little combination there. The Republican Party's not far behind. It just they have to get their act together. They have to decide whether they're going the old guard that the root of the old guard that was establishment Republican Party, or whether they're going with the new guard that is the tear down the system and rebuild it wing of the party, because that's the ones that are having success right now. So we'll see who comes out on top of that wrestling match, probably within the next 10 years or so. One part of that party is likely to either be eliminated or break off and form another party. That's
Can we go ahead
happened
and
before throughout
can we
history.
go ahead? Can we go ahead and call feminism the FFF? The feminism fuckery furor,
Oh my
whatever
gosh.
it is.
How about we just call them feminists? it's an ideology, right? And they have a dogma. They have their belief that the evolution of law and policy throughout history around the relationship between the household and the government, and the cultural standard that the father and husband of the household was the head of the household and was the shield between the rest of the family and the government, that oppressed women. And they have this storyline that men did that solely to oppress and control women, and not for any degree of protection of women and children, not to facilitate, women's role as mothers and wives, but just to oppress them, which I think is baloney. I've always thought that was baloney. But that's an ideology, because they have that type of belief. They have a moral and ethical code, which I also disagree with, because their ethical code treats it as less of an evil to do harm to male human beings than to female human beings, and less of a boon in society to help male human beings than to help female human beings. And I think it's just as important to help both sexes, and it's just as evil to harm both sexes. It doesn't matter what the person's demographics are. I don't care where you came from. I don't care what your beliefs are, what you do in your life. Doing harm is the same, and helping someone, genuine help, is the same for everybody in terms of good or evil. But that's their code, and they do have one, right? Say they have. You could almost call them a religion, because the patriarchy theory treats men like they're both God and the devil, but it's more like a cult, right? And so while they're calling us an ideology, and they refer to incel ideology, even though incels mostly just talk about their circumstances and how they feel about them, feminists do have an ideology. And I think it's one that is harmful and dangerous. It hinders both sexes.
And it extends from femcells to whatever the word is for women who are having all the sex they ever wanted, from all the 6 inches and the 6 figurers and the 6 packers, but they're still feminists.
They still can't.
Go on.
So with the femcells, they can get the sex that they want, but they can't get the man that they want to commit.
Yeah,
that's the main problem with femcells.
Yeah, that is an issue. And if you start competing based for attention from men based on superficial things like just how they look or just how much money they make and things like that, you end up in that situation. You're going to compete with all the other women who are superficial about their relationship standards. So femcells, it's it's hard to call them involuntary because they're in their situation because they have toxic standards. It's toxic to ignore the important things that you need to build a relationship with somebody and only look at superficial details, right? So when we look at this, Alex is on Reddit as Fems are the gender KKK. This, he tells me, stands for feminists are the gender Ku Klux Klan. She won't analyze this, right? She won't say what this means to her or whether she agrees or disagrees with it. She just puts it out there. We message on Reddit, then speak on Discord, a platform first built to help gamers communicate, but which is now used for other purposes. It was instrumental in organizing the Charlottesville Unite the Right white nationalist rally in 2017, and the Ukrainian military uses it to direct attacks against Russia. I'm not quite sure why she felt it was necessary to mention both of those, actually. The only thing I can think of was the Charlottesville thing is poisoning the water. And I guess she thinks the Ukrainian military's use of it redeems it. But I mean, it is a widely used platform for a lot of different things. In fact, we're using it. If somebody does happen to send us a super chow, I will be reading it from a Discord chat. So we started the show by entering a website that we link to each other in a Discord chat. So there you go. But it's not something that is ideological. Like Discord doesn't. You're not limited to where you have to be from a particular group of people to have a Discord.
You say that now.
Yeah, that could change, right?
Especially in the UK.
Kind of wants that to change.
That's gonna change in March anyway.
Well, yeah, you have to give your ID in the UK now, don't you?
Yeah, but I don't have any ID. Also, the passport change is gonna come in next month as well. So if you're foreign-born national, you might get rejected. So they might deport me.
Now, where would they send you?
Back to Jamaica, probably.
That's different. How long have you lived in the UK?
Since I was born. So I was born here in 85. My mom came here in 66.
Isn't that what they're criticizing the United States?
I think you'll be fine, Richard.
So they're mad that we don't want our country. I shouldn't say we, but that in my country, in the United States, there is consideration of the idea that giving birth to a baby in the United States shouldn't necessarily automatically make the baby and therefore the mother a U.S. citizen. Right? The whole world is shaming us for that, just for considering that maybe, if somebody illegally immigrates here or overstays a visa and then gives birth here, that giving birth here doesn't automatically give them the ability to be a citizen. But the UK is going to do that, and the UK is one of the countries that's shaming us for it.
And then they're not going to use it to crack down on migrants, not even second-generation migrants or even third-generation migrants, because we know how the UK works. The UK government is only going to crack down on British people of those various demographics I outlined just now, namely men, white men, cisgendered men, straight men, Christian men, and such. They're going to make exceptions for anyone who doesn't fall into those categories, and maybe they will crack down on the likes of me, and they'll be like, no, we have to deport this Dr. Random Camp fellow, and then I'll be like, well, where are you going to deport me to?
Connecticut.
Hopefully, yes. Please do deport me to the United States. That would solve a shitload of problems for me.
There we go. Well, if they start doing that, wouldn't you be considered politically persecuted at that point in time? I think that's
I,
one of the things that qualifies you to file refugee status.
I would hope so. Like, because it takes
Yeah,
fucking years to actually migrate to the United States along the usual legal lines. So, yeah, please do, British government, fucking fast track me
there we go.
to the
We'll
United
take you.
States.
We'll take you. I hate to see people having to leave their homeland. But I know that it's
Plus,
not the way that it was before. It's changed. But
plus my family my family's the Windrush generation, so we were caught up in the Windrush scandal as well.
now, see that I'm not
My
familiar with.
uncle. So back in the 40s, the government advertised a lot of jobs in Jamaica for to come over here to fill the jobs after World War II.
Mhm.
And they were like grandfathered. A lot of Jamaicans were grandfathered in. They didn't get the papers sorted in time. So what my uncle had to do, he had to get all his papers sorted out, and he lost his pension, but he got it back eventually because he came over here during the 50s. Same thing with my stepdad. Same thing with my stepdad as well. If it wasn't for a trip to France in the 70s, he would have faced the same fate as his brother.
Which was having to go back to Jamaica?
No, he sorted out all his paperwork in England.
I see.
So on the threat of going back to Jamaica, but by the time, because he's in his 80s, he's in his 70s now. So if he was to go back to Jamaica, he wouldn't know anybody. He would have had no family over in Jamaica.
And no support system at 70 years old.
Yeah,
That would
and
be
no support system. Yeah,
that'd be quite a thing to do to somebody. Which
because he was
this
stuck in.
is one
He
of the
was,
reasons
oh,
why, like, even though I'm my stance. I've told people my stance before on borders. I think that if you don't have borders, you don't have a country, right? And you should be able to know who's coming into your country, and you should be able to, like, I had a neighbor that put MS-13 gang graffiti all over the apartment complex where I live last year and the year before. And so this wasn't just something that I'm talking about, this happened out in, some other state. No, this was in my backyard. We had a neighbor taken away by ICE that had things on his electronic devices that were so vile and graphic and disgusting that I think if I described them on YouTube, our channel would get banned. And this was it was just disgusting. And this was criminal activity. It wasn't just drugs. This was abuse of human beings and animals. And it was this is something that, I'm versed in because it happened close by, right? And I don't think that any nation is wrong to say we do not want people coming into our country and committing horrific crimes while they're here. We don't want people coming into our country and hurting people. And we don't want people bringing children into our country and selling them to criminals in our country to enslave them. Right? None of those things should be happening. It doesn't change the fact that we're going to have immigration, and it's a good thing that we have people coming into our country who want to be here because they want to contribute as part of the country, contribute to our culture and be neighbors. And I have some great neighbors that are legal immigrants, first generation legal immigrants who are just absolutely livid that our neighborhood got flooded with people who came with the caravans. And when they saw that graffiti, I lost neighbors because they moved away because they were scared. They knew who those people were and they fled the neighborhood. They were afraid they might get murdered. Right? That's a very complex discussion. But for Pete's sake, if somebody's been in a nation from birth and they don't speak a language of the nation of their parents' origin, and they have a support system here and would be going to where there's no support system, or they're elderly, or things like that. Um, those are considerations that should protect an individual from being sent away into an environment where they're going to suffer or die because of their circumstances. And that's, again, we talk about these things from a men's rights perspective, but it doesn't matter whether that individual is male or female, old or young, whether they're able-bodied or disabled. If you're going to put them into a bad situation after a lifetime here or a lifetime in the UK, that's abuse. We ought to be able to keep gang members out of the country without abusing people who, like, you have no control, Richard, over you being in the UK. You didn't come to the UK against, somebody else's will deliberately. If you were here from birth, if you're there from birth, you're a little young to be making deliberate choices. I mean, it sounds like your folks were kind of scammed. But yeah, that's crazy. We did get a super chow.
The Windrush was like was a big scandal a few years ago in the UK. So.
Well, I hope they don't do that to you. I really hope they don't do that to you. That's insane.
Because my passport needs renewing. And they got a new law in place. I need to do more research about it. So.
Definitely your support network should be helping you with that as well. Meredith G sent us $5 and said HBR Talk 390, honey for the Badgers. That's Meredith G, our top G. Usually sends us a comment on a regular basis. But yeah, I hope that it's hard to expect governments to get their heads on straight with regard to that. But I certainly hope that they do when they're looking at how they're treating the elderly, people with disabilities, people who've had a lifetime in a nation that speaks English, and they're thinking of sending them to a nation where there are many people who don't. A large portion of the culture is built around an alternative to English that they don't have. Whether it's another complete language or whether it's a dialect that you wouldn't understand, like that's just wrong.
And I don't understand patois anyway. So.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean right there. Heck, I know people, or have known people rather, that were born and raised in the United States and fluent in Spanish in the United States, that if they went to the country of their ancestry and tried to speak Spanish there, then nobody would understand them. And I mean, there are parts of the UK, like, I often have trouble understanding your accent, Richard. And sometimes we get our slang terms mixed up.
Sorry.
Between the US, and it's not just you. When I went to ICMI 16 and ICMI 18 in the UK, I had to ask a lot of people to repeat themselves. But we're all speaking English. It's just I'm speaking Ohio, and people in the UK are speaking various dialects from all over the UK. And sometimes if I go to different parts of the US, I don't understand the language. Like, I had a customer that was a bit more southern in his origin than Ohio come into my convenience store where I worked years ago. And he says to me, "Sarong your iron machine." And I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. We don't have an iron machine. I don't even know what an iron machine does. Like, what is it? Is it a machine made of iron? So I looked at him. I was like, can you say that again? I didn't understand. So more slowly, a little bit more slowly, but not much more slowly. He says, "Strong your iron machine." What the, okay. And I'm like, I'm not trying to play dumb. I really don't understand what you're saying to me. And finally I asked him, what does the iron machine do? And he goes, "You use it to put iron in your tires." And it took me a split second before I went, "Oh, air in your tires." He's asking me what's wrong with the air machine. And it's different accent in the same country. I had zero understanding until I asked him what it did. And of course he thought I was an idiot. But that's it. We speak American English, and in various parts of the country that doesn't even mean the same thing.
And ironically, despite the fact that if you travel 100 miles in any direction in Britain, they have a completely different accent, we can still understand each other.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, if you ask me, you can identify how British someone is more by their voice than by their appearance. Now, this doesn't work universally. You have the likes of Ash Sarkar, who is a Bangladeshi immigrant, but she sounds like someone who was educated in Oxford. And to some degree, you can, because as you are integrated into Britain, you develop the accent of the British, and to that degree you can because it's difficult to fake unless you're particularly good at accents, like theatre kids like me are quite good at doing. But another way of ascertaining it is the devotion a given person has to any given country. You could ask Ash Sarkar, to whose country she is the most devoted, and she will say in a perfect Oxford accent, "Bangladesh, boys, we're winning, boys, don't you see?" And today you can go, oh, okay, well, I guess it doesn't matter what your accent is.
Yeah.
You're a traitor to the country in which you currently reside. But yeah, it still stands. This is me trying not to be racist, because as I keep saying, your voice and your accent has nothing to do with race. Your voice and your accent is something almost entirely culturally defined, and this is a good way of pulling it apart, because like 50% of people who live in London do not speak in an English accent. They talk in this, I believe it's called roadman accent, and if upon interviewing such a person, it kind of doesn't matter what questionnaire they can answer when it comes to the history of England. If you're taught like that, right? If you like, that's a pretty good indication that you're only sub English. And if you can't even talk in the English language, then it doesn't really even matter what your accent is. You definitely don't belong here. And it's much the same in the United States. Because God bless you, you're still talking English.
Yeah.
Because it is the best language. And if someone gets there and they can't even talk in an accent that can be understood by the majority of Americans, if you can't even talk in the English language, then you don't belong there. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what your physiognomy is in terms of what race you look like.
We have a history of people that don't speak English being here, migrating here, but it's still the main language in the country, and usually people who immigrate here to stay will do their best to learn it. But sometimes it's the second generation and not the first generation that picks it up the best. But in any case, it can be quite a barrier. One of my childhood friends, his mom was unable to learn to speak English, but she could speak American Sign Language. And so it gave her the ability to speak to some people in the community who couldn't speak Spanish, but a lot of times her kids had to translate for her. And it's a rough situation. And it's ideal for people to be able to, in their community, when you want to go into a store and you want to go up to, say, the butcher counter and order something, that to be able to speak and the butcher understands you. Um, and I always realized it was a bit of a disadvantage, but I never really got it until I went with my mom to our sister city in Japan as an ambassador. And I don't speak Japanese. We had to have a translator, and like I only speak English. That's the only language that I speak, and I only speak really the American version of it. I keep learning new words when I speak to people from England, or learning new meanings for words that I thought I understood. But in Japan, we were at a hotel overnight, and we needed a medication, an over-the-counter medication, and the hotel was in an airport, and we had to go down into the airport and try to buy from a vendor, and the vendor did not speak English because they were in Japan. They spoke Japanese. We didn't speak Japanese because we were from Ohio. We spoke English, and so we had to use hand gestures and the very few words that seem to be understood by people all over the world, that even if they don't speak English, to try to get what we needed. And it was amazing how crippling that was, as the minute you can't communicate. But I mean, English and English are not the same language either. There's at least one racial slur in English that sounds like you're asking somebody if they have dined yet in American English. So I had somebody say that to me one day in conversation, and I answered, no, I haven't had lunch yet, and they just looked at me like I was nuts. So
Wait, what?
yeah,
Can you elaborate?
in my neighborhood, if someone says "jeet," it's usually in a sentence followed by the word "yet." Jeet yet? No, I haven't eaten yet. What do you want to get? And it's.
I thought you were talking
didn't
about an Indian
know-
racial slur.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a slur, because that's not something that we say around here.
It's
until
not. It's
somebody
not. It's
told
not a
me.
slur. It's like Jameen. It's a
It's
two-syllable
another
word
one I don't know.
where it means "Do you know what I mean?" It's a
Oh, okay,
six-word.
yeah.
It's a six-word phrase that is expressed in English in a two-syllable word. Jameen.
Yeah. But I've had conversations like that where somebody says something, and I'll answer what it sounds like to me, and they have no idea why I didn't understand what they just said. So, but none of that has anything to do with Discord. Other than the fact that the UK is about to screw up Discord, because everybody is going to be considered teenagers until we give them personally identifying information that can be used to steal our bank accounts, which I'm not doing. So if they want to call me a teenager, that's fine. I'll be a 53-year-old teenager. But so Alex here, she's going to dismantle Alex on a Discord voice call. Alex sounds harsh and paranoid. He's concerned, he says, that speaking to me is giving the enemy, the feminists, ammunition. This indicates that he knows that she's about to do a hit piece on him. That's when you're in that situation, the best thing to do is not talk to the media. If you're going to talk to the media, record the entire conversation. Make sure they know you're recording. But do record. course, with me, that resulted in the media not using my portion of an interview that they did of the attendees of a conference for a hit piece they were doing on the movement. I was the only person that Jeff Charlotte interviewed for GQ magazine and then didn't include in his article, because I had the ability to prove what I actually said versus what he was telling people everybody said. And that article contains multiple lies in it about claims of things that people said. So I'm kind of glad I recorded, and I am glad I let him know I recorded too. We were in Michigan, and I don't know if it's a 2-party state or a 1-party state. So, but always when you're talking to the media, be recording. But he agrees to meet me, she says, because he has a perspective he needs the world to hear. Outside Blackburn Station, he looks mild and apprehensive, around 40 years old, with intense blue eyes and fading hair. We walk through an empty retail park, past sprawling gray homeware stores and gyms, to Pizza Hut, where we've agreed to have lunch. This is a very feminine writing style, by the way. I don't usually see this in news articles from male writers. It's it creates a mood, and it sort of characterizes the person a little bit. Alex is a radical. I reject objectification, he says almost immediately. I reject the term misogyny. It's a feminist hate dog whistle. So again, she's not giving any reason why that makes him radical. She's not giving any reason why he's wrong in her mind to reject these things. She's just putting it out there. He's a radical. These are the things that make him a radical. Objectification is the feminist term for viewing someone specifically with sexual ideas in mind, basically. Treating someone as a sexy person, or treating someone as a person that you would want to flirt with or have sex with, which they're a little bit obsessed with that. They use the term sex object and as a means of indicating that the individual with this perspective doesn't see the individual they're looking at in this manner as a human being, but as an object that they can use. But when you get into descriptions that they give of the behaviors, the speech patterns, and thought patterns around it, they're not talking about objects. The people are not talking about others as objects. They're talking about others as people, and what they're talking about wanting is aspects of romantic relationships. And it's another one that bugs me, right? It's a thought terminating cliche. And men and women both do this. Men and women both look at each other this way. Men and women both think about each other this way. And men and women, their way of engaging with each other, interacting with each other, is affected by it and colored by it. And men and women as adults, learn to control their impulses. So even if you have thoughts or ideas, it doesn't necessarily mean you act on them. And even, those thoughts and ideas might be limited to smaller groups of people. You may interact with people of the opposite sex all the time and never think of them that way. But somebody that comes along and presents in a particular manner that strikes a chord with you, and then you might view them that way. But when you talk to feminists about this, or when you listen to what feminists have to say about it, it all gets lumped in as a means of belittling and looking down on someone when the looker is a man and the looked at person is a woman. But they don't want to do the same thing when the looker is a woman and the looked at person is a man. And like I said before, misogyny gets mostly used as a thought-terminating cliche, where this for instance, this use of radical. Alex is a radical for rejecting these two feminist concepts. She would call him a misogynist as well for rejecting feminism, but she wouldn't call herself a misandrist for rejecting men's human rights activism. About 10 years ago, Alex started to think men were mistreated. And again, this is very careful phrasing. About 10 years ago, Alex started to think that men were mistreated. He heard people talk about male violence and found it insulting. So she immediately went to that. It's deeply fucking offensive, to be quite frank, me being told I'm responsible for the violence of other men, he says. When Alex warms to a theme, he talks faster and louder and vibrates with anger, like he's orating from his Pizza Hut pulpit. So notice what she did there, right? He started to say something that is reasonable and rational here. And so what she did was describe him in a way that makes him seem laughable in order to distract you from the fact that why would you say somebody is responsible for somebody else's violence? Right? She couldn't argue with what he said. So she used an ad hominem attack. He leans forward. Should I tell you to take responsibility for other women and stop killing children? Fucking absurd. He has tomato sauce around his mouth. Okay, so this paragraph is the reason why I picked this story. Right. Pro-abortion women have made abortion, being aborted, the leading cause of human death in the world. Abortions outnumber, this is elective abortions, by the way, not, the mom's going to die and the baby's going to die and we can save one of them. This is, she just doesn't want to have a baby, right? They've made that number so high worldwide that it outnumbers cardiac deaths. It outnumbers deaths from pulmonary causes. It outnumbers strokes. It outnumbers poverty, starvation, war, right? Any disease you can name, including cancer. So if somebody was going to generalize to an entire sex, if you look at criminal violence, less than 0.1% of the world population are perpetrators of criminal violence. But the leading cause of human death in the world is being aborted during gestation. Now, I don't feel responsible for other women choosing that, especially after 30 years of pro-life activism and donating to abortion alternative organizations that help women, that choose to keep their baby. That they get clothes for the baby, they get food, they get help finding a job, they can get education, help with an education, so that they're not stuck relying on tax dollars to support their lifestyle. I don't feel responsible for that. And I don't think a man should feel responsible for somebody else's crimes either. But this woman writing this article could not make an argument as to why she thinks they should. All she could do was paint Alex as a clown in the most mundane terms that she could possibly come up with. I find that absurd and offensive. I mean, like, that's what we're dealing with, right? So when you read stories about the manosphere, the whole manosphere, and then they do something like this, watch for this stuff. keep in mind, are you being manipulated? Are you being told something about us? Or are you being given evidence so that you can judge us on your own? The average person is a misandrist, Alex informs me. Both men and women hate men. Feminism is the most successful hate movement to exist ever, he says. There's loads of radical feminists cackling like hyenas in glee at the Ukraine war and hoping it spreads so men in the West will get drafted and die.
Where's the lie? Someone tell me where the lie is.
It's funny because when I found this, I had just had an argument on X with a lady who was really deeply offended that there were men talking about, hoping that this war would end because there are men being drafted and dying. There are men in Ukraine being drafted and dying, and there are men in Russia being drafted and dying, and there are men from other countries that are volunteering. They don't even have to get drafted. They get called into it. They get caught up in it and conned into it, and they're dying, and it's horrific. War, the best thing that can happen in a war is for it to be over, right? But she was mad because she thought it was misogynistic that they only cared about the men. Well, the women have been displaced and the women have lost their families. Yes, that's true, and we feel sorry for them. But the issue that we're talking about is conscription. And outside of a handful of countries in the world, women don't get conscripted. So they're not part of the discussion. They might be part of the discussion as in, we don't support doing this to the men in our lives. We care more about them than to support something like that. But they're not the victims in this situation.
It's like that quote by, I forget who it was. It might have been Virginia Woolf. Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. Well, yeah, it's
kind of melodramatic.
Maybe men ought to be afraid that they will fucking die in a war that women voted for.
Yeah. Yep. And women never have to really consider whether or not that might happen to them, unless again they're from one of the handful of countries where women get conscripted, and even in those countries, men still face a harsher environment. They still have duties in the military that women do not. It's not equal anywhere, actually. Whether you're in one of the nations that has society-wide, like there's some nations that when you graduate from the public education system, you have a certain number of years of public service that are militarized, varying degrees of militarization anyway. Oh, did we just get a tornado watch? I hope that's not giving me. Last year when it did this, it was giving tornado watches, giving me tornado watches from Coldwater, but no, this says Dayton. Okay, that's great. All right.
Can we, Brian? Are you still there? Can we carry on the show without Hannah? I don't mean that. I mean, I'm sure we'll be fine.
All right, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. We can hear you.
Okay, good. I went to unplug my power cord, and I hit my my headphones. I unplugged the power cord so I can just run off toward the safe spot with the computer. So I'm walking now.
Is it fully charged?
Sorry, guys. Huh? Oh yeah, it's fully charged. It's been plugged in up until right now. So there's probably not going to be a tornado. Most of the time, when we have a tornado watch, it does not hit where I am. But we did actually have an F3 go directly over the apartment one time. And actually, one of my stupid moments.
Did you film it as well?
Yes. The storm was really quiet. It wasn't coming down, heavy. There was no hail. There were no evidences that we usually see or that I'm used to seeing when a tornado has hit an area where I was. Which, when I was growing up, I grew up in northwestern Ohio instead of southwestern Ohio. So, like, we'd get F1s, we'd get F2s. That's about it, aside from the F5 that hit Van Wert. But then in 2019, on Memorial Day, we were filming outside because it was really interesting, very big differences in the way the clouds looked and, things that are evidence that a tornado is probably happening close by, but just not the ones that I was really used to. And the lightning was pretty interesting. So we're filming out the front door into the parking lot area, and I'm like painting back and forth. And then I heard the sound of the tornado. So I'm like, all right, we're going to have to mosey into the bathroom because there's one probably within a mile of us. I can hear it. And so my husband and my son and I started heading toward the bathroom. And all of a sudden, after we had shut the door, we start walking, my ears pop. And I turned into a drill sergeant. Now go! He was shoving both of the guys, and my husband was like, what are you doing? Shoved me in first. And we just barely got the door shut when it threw the base of our, we have a little greenhouse out in our back patio. It takes up like the entire back patio area. But it's not a big area. And it has 4x4 boards as its base. And it threw that up against the side of the apartment loudly. And that's the only thing really that we lost was that. And it was, it's plastic. So it wasn't something, we really lucked out. Because if we'd still had the door open, we'd have gotten sucked outside for sure. But never do that, guys. That was really dumb. And I put the video on Twitter the next day, and a whole bunch of local news agencies contacted me and asked if they could use it. And I said, sure, but only if you tell people this video shouldn't exist, because I should have already been in our safe spot, because I don't want anybody else doing this because they see this and it looks cool. You can see the F3 tornado. When I went back and looked at it, there was just one lightning flash where you can identify the funnel cloud. It was rain wrapped, and it was already over the military base. So it was way less than a mile away. And like I said, it was 3 seconds away. So that was bad. But we lucked out, and we did not die in the tornado. Everybody else that got hit, the area was so bad. Trotwood looked like it had been carpet bombed. And there were parts of Beaver Creek also that looked like they had bombs dropped on them. Most of my route to and from a couple of the different houses that I've worked at was completely blocked off, completely demolished. And that was a heck of a thing. So what we had happen, we had a piece of plastic that we could replace got torn up, but areas, to the west of us, to the south of us, to the east of us, and to the north of us, there was a death here. There was a death in Salina, and there were a lot of people that just completely lost their homes. And there were like 7 tornadoes bouncing around the Miami Valley at the time. So even though I'm probably not going to get hit tonight, there's probably not going to be anything come here, I'm going to sit here on the floor in the bathroom and finish this live stream because I'm not taking that stupid chance again. You get lucky. You get to get lucky once, and then after that, you have to be smart or else.
Well, thank God we have women protecting you from these tornadoes.
Yeah, with their tornado shield laws. That's what we need. Tornado shield laws for when it's illegal for the tornado to strike my apartment complex, or anybody else that I care about. So that pretty much covers the entire world. No more tornadoes, guys. I solved it. We just outlaw them. So let's see. He goes on. Dating is a big part of the problem. Alex thinks women practice something called hypergamy, selecting men who are richer, more successful, or more powerful than them. Men have to earn status for romance. That's how women set it up, because women actually control relationships. And again, where is the lie? Right? If you went back before the existence of romantic chivalry, that might be a different story, because families controlled relationships for the most part back then. But when it's individual to individual, women do control relationships. Like, we're the ones whose approval gets sought. We're the ones who get asked out. Right? We're the ones who mistakenly think that we don't have to bring anything to the table because we are the table. And unfortunately, there are a lot of women who think that the only thing that they need to consider in a relationship is how much does he make, and how powerful is he socially, right? Or how much business does he control? And that's probably part of the reason why the divorce rate has gone up so high.
But it's not a thing. It's not. None of this exists. Don't worry.
Yeah, see, again, she makes no argument here. She doesn't say anything. She just says, Alex thinks that women practice something called hypergamy, which she puts in quotes as if it's not a word that has existed. Then she says in the next paragraph, the idea of hypergamy dates back 3,000 years to the
Hindu rest
or caste system.
3,000 years, my ass. But try a million years. Try ever since fucking single-celled organisms divided into male and female.
Yeah, you have different cultures doing things different ways, right? In a lot of Western culture, where in the Hindu culture, if I understand correctly, the idea of a dowry is different than it is in Western culture, and it's for different reasons. But there was, this is Shah is his name, has talked about this, and I listened to his stream on this. There are two distinctly different ways that male-female relationships, courtships, marriages, and everything have been handled with regard to what value someone brings into a family. And it depends on what the culture expects of a wife. So if a wife is expected to be a part of the family business, basically, historically families, there wasn't welfare, there weren't, you didn't go someplace and get a job. Your family ran a bakery, or your family were sheep herders, or had a farm, or your family was mostly military, or things like that. If the women were expected to be an integral part of that, where their labor contributed to the gaining of resources in the family, the bride price, the dowry, was what the groom paid to the father of the bride for taking one of the workers from his family. But in historical cultures where the wife was not supposed to, not expected to contribute in that manner, then the bride was expected to bring money into the relationship with her. So she would bring a dowry when she got married, and usually her father paid it to the groom, so that he was not sending his daughter in to weigh the groom down economically, and that way he didn't have to worry that his daughter was going to starve. And so there's, in both instances, you would want, if you were part of a family that you're going to lose a worker, and you're arranging a marriage, and you're trying to, in a lot of those old circumstances, you're trying to build an alliance with some other family with a similar type of business to yours, or a related type of business to yours. Oh, you make cloth from wool. Guess what? We're sheep herders. Let's make an arrangement here. Something along those lines. Not quite necessarily that, but something along those lines. You would want to maximize how much you would get from the groom, and in order to do that, you're going to look for a more successful groom, right? But if you were sending your daughter, and you've been supporting her and taking care of her, and you're sending her out in the world to be married to someone else, and that guy is going to be supporting her and taking care of her from now on, and you're not, you're going to look for the best guy for that job too. So when families controlled relationships, when courtship was, you ask the father for permission to court the daughter, and for permission to ask the daughter's hand in marriage, and so on. Getting dad's approval pretty much created hypergamy. Women didn't necessarily create that, but they most certainly approved it, because who wants to marry into a situation where they're going to struggle more than they did before they got married? You want to struggle less. You want to have your ducks in a row, and have a good life with your partner.
And I presume a lot of this made sense when women spent so much of their time pregnant.
Yep.
And in the process of gestating those babies. And
Yep.
I would think a lot of this was solved, particularly in the West, with all of these medical advances, when women didn't have to spend most of their time pregnant. They could take up some of their time pregnant with the 1 or 2 children that was required to keep the family going, and indeed the species going. I would imagine it was different in ancient India, when they had to keep pumping out babies because most of them would die.
Yeah,
And,
and a lot of ancient cultures, that was the case. That's why it used to be so normal to have families that were, this woman had 13 kids or 14 kids. But then when you go to the local graveyard that in their area, and you learn more about that family, there are several gravestones with 6 or 7 or 8 year lifespans, or 1 year lifespans or less, on them, because back then people would die if they got pneumonia. They didn't have medication for that could guarantee survival. People would die if they got, in much larger numbers than today, if they got influenza, or even if they got various types of pox. And even if they didn't immediately die from a lot of these things, they may develop lifelong health problems that eventually killed them. So, and then there were accidents. And that was the other thing back then. It wasn't just that women were part of the family business. As soon as your child was old enough to so much as follow an instruction and carry a bucket, full with water in it, your kid was old enough to work. And what we have today, where we raise our children in the safest possible environment, and we send them to a school system to educate them, or we educate them at home, and they're expected to be able to read and write and use arithmetic in their daily lives, and they're expected to know the history of their country and their world, and they're expected to know facts about their government and their culture, even the parts of their culture that they aren't involved in. Like that didn't exist throughout history. You had a time period where life was work from about the age where today you would start kindergarten until you died. or until your family took care of you, in your golden years, which didn't last very long. And even though there were people who got old, right? You always hear the lifespan, the average lifespan historically being stated at like 50 years old or even in the 30s. It's because so many people died in infancy and early childhood. And even in the start of the industrial age, children worked in environments that were extremely dangerous. My great aunts worked in textile mills when they were young, and they worked in textile mills before labor laws that prevented children from working in those mills. It was a whole different world. So people had a lot more children, partly because children were part of the family's workforce, and partly because children were a big gamble. You'd go through all of that, all the pregnancy, gestation, childbirth, in the first year of the child being completely helpless, and then the early years of the child being, a walking disaster because they're going to get into everything, in hopes that the child would, contribute as a member of the family once they got old enough to start doing simple tasks. But a lot of times the child never got that old. And so, but yeah, all of that, they don't consider those things, and they don't consider why something that might have been functional 3,000 years ago is a problem today. Right? There's a lot of things that might have been functional 3,000 years ago that we don't do anymore because we now have better ways of doing them. And if you want to create a family bond 3,000 years ago, it's a different environment. Right? You have your parents, your siblings, your cousins, aunts and uncles, are all around. They're part of your community to support the continuity and dedication in your marriage, right? Today, one of my daughters lives several states away. She doesn't have any of her immediate family around, and her husband is from another country, so he has none of his immediate family around either. And so they have to have, their dedication has to be based on having common goals, common interests, common moral codes and ethical codes, right? They can't be unequally yoked. They can't, one of them have a very strong religious belief system and the other one have none. They can't, if they do that, each one of those things takes away from how easy it is for them to maintain a sense of dedication and intimacy and understanding of each other and things like that. Their closeness is based on, their unity is based on unifying principles in their personalities, in their interests, and it's based on a very strong foundation. And if you don't have that strong foundation, you have what we have today, a high divorce rate. So it doesn't make sense for hypergamy to be as prevalent today as it is. It doesn't help foster that dedication, that caring and concern. It doesn't help to foster love, right? It only makes you view your partner in a utilitarian light, which is not healthy.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the Industrial Revolution, which was indeed led by the British, and later in the rest of Europe, and then later in the North Americas. We are in Britain, we are grown up with these history lessons drilled into our heads of how much the working class of Britain had it drilled into them, not just psychologically but physically. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just replacing humans with machines overnight. No, it was very much humans operating those machines overnight, and the working class of Britain were very much put in charge of those machines, and that became something that was called the satanic mills. Like, it wasn't just men who were put in charge of these things; it was women and children as well. And this was what took the British Empire from something that was only in charge of Britain to something that was able to enhance the productivity of the entire world. Now, this is often called colonialism, and yes, I guess that's kind of what it was. But just like the agricultural revolution was these pioneers spreading across the world, like telling people, you can you can farm things, right? You can take the land into your own hands, and you don't have to be nomads anymore. You don't have to wander across the earth hunting and gathering. You can actually you can make these things called farms. And
Yep.
the same thing happened in the Industrial Revolution. We created these things that we call mills, and it's going to take the devoted effort of not just your men but your women and your children. And yes, it did suck. There's all manner of horror stories from the 1800s and the early 1900s of what you have to put your people through, your men and your women and your children. And once they get there, you can you can change the world, but it's going to take the effort of all of the above. And this relates to the great men create good times, good times create weak men create bad, and all that shit. But it's not to do with men. I know it's phrased as men, whereas what it means is humanity. But the point remains. When people are put through exercise, they eventually become better off for it. And I don't want to sound like it's downplaying the dark shit that British people had to go through in the 1800s. But the whole point is that it makes your offspring better off. It makes future generations better off. But that doesn't mean that the whole paradigm changes for your future generations.
It sort of takes a conscious effort to change some aspects of culture. Even romantic chivalry and gynocentrism happened as a result of the conscious efforts of courtesans in the French aristocracy in the 13th century. So you had they wrote, I guess, what you would consider to be the predecessors of proclamations, blog posts. Their letters to each other and their way of communicating with their community. They express these ideas of that are the foundation of romantic chivalry. That prior to that, I think the dedication and the effort that was supposed to be put into maintaining a relationship was not so one-sided as it is today. The idea that the man has to do all the seeking and the woman has to make all the decisions. Like prior to that particular philosophy, you had the whole family involved in helping couples form, helping their young find compatible future partners. But you also had this expectation that the wife would be as dedicated as the husband, and that each would do their best to make the other happy, and each would do their best to defend and protect in various ways the other. And today, we don't have quite the same expectations of women that we used to. And I think it takes away from both sexes. I've had occasion to be very protective of my husband under a variety of circumstances, not necessarily circumstances of physical violence and physical danger, although there is an element of that in choosing not to put oneself in danger because you know that he's going to have to protect you, right? But other things, and it is it feels like an accomplishment to succeed in that protective effort, and it may not feel the same as scaring off a big scary dog or another person that is that's trying to be violent, but I don't think very many women get that experience because they're not taught to care that much. They're not taught to keep their husband's interests in mind. They're taught that it's his job to keep their interests in mind. So yeah, it's again that whole paragraph. That's another good reason to pick this story. When you look at these issues, just looking at today and clucking your tongue and saying, "Oh, he thinks this is true," and he objects to it, doesn't really tell the whole story. If you want people to have successful relationships, you have to give people the tools and foster the right type of attitudes toward each other and the right environment. If you're doing exactly the opposite, you tear people's relationships apart. And the result in the United States has been that my generation, I know I'm speaking to boomers, to Gen Xers, to millennials, to Zoomers, and possibly even to some from Gen Alpha at this point, but my generation has a 50% divorce rate. Right? That's terrible. And the next generations have a lower divorce rate, but it's because you guys aren't getting married at all. Like not even trying to start lifelong relationships. And I think that's a heartbreaking thing. It's something that's been taken away from you. And it's something that's you're missing out on. And it's because women have not been raised with the accountability that they need to contribute functionally to their side of the relationship. And at the same time, men have been made vulnerable to legal maneuverings and social maneuverings that can destroy their lives. And so they don't trust women now. And they're not wrong.
Evolution has prepared men to protect women and has prepared women to preserve men. And these may seem like subjectively different concepts, but there's an important difference in that subjectivity. But because men and women are both very empathetic creatures, very unusually empathetic creatures when it comes to the animal kingdom, or indeed any animal kingdom. Men protect women, and women can observe this protection and reciprocate it, and women can also protect their men. And while women preserve their men, men can witness this and also preserve their women. And it works out quite wonderfully. It has worked out quite wonderfully for thousands of years, if not millions, depending on what you consider to be human. And yeah, we've done this. We've observed each other doing what we can to help the other continue to exist. Men protect women, women observe this, and so they protect their men. Women preserve men, and so men observe this, and so they preserve their women. And it's, like I said, it's worked out for a long time until this bullshit came along that told women, no, not only do you not need to preserve your men, but your men don't need to, well, your men do need to protect you. But given that you don't need to preserve them, they should not learn from you nor preserve you either. And this throws a big old fucking monkey wrench into the whole thing. And this is why we find ourselves in this situation where women don't feel the need to preserve their men anymore. And men have observed this and gone, well, why the fuck do I need to protect you anymore? And yes, both sides of this are a fucked up state of affairs. But let us not forget where it started. It started with women being convinced that they don't need to preserve their men anymore, let alone protect them, like, yeah, by the transitive property.
It's I think a lot of people don't even understand the how and why of it, right? Like a simple example, in Christian wedding vows, in the woman's vow, I think in some denominations it's in both, but in the one I grew up with, it's just in the woman's vow. You promise not only to love, honor, and cherish, but also to obey. And I know a lot of women object to this, which if you don't trust him enough to agree to that, knowing that he's not going to just use it to order you around like a jerk all of a sudden, then you shouldn't be marrying that guy. But the reason for that is because you can't protect someone who does not obey you when you tell them what to do to be safe. And you can't have a consistent attitude of don't tell me what to do the rest of the time, and then only in moments where there's danger get it right, because you don't even always know. And a silly example of that is one night we were out on our front porch, the same door we were filming at when the tornado arrived, right? But this was just a regular, normal, calm weather night. And we were, there were some stray cats in the neighborhood that we help get into SIXA to get them homed, get them spayed or neutered so we don't have the neighborhood overrun with a bunch of stray kittens and stuff. But in any case, we're out there doing that. And there's a thing that happens if you put out too much dry cat food and there's not enough cats to consume it. Certain types of creatures like that besides cats. And so I'm out there interacting with these cats, and all of a sudden my husband looks at me, and in the command voice, which I almost never hear, I think I've heard it like 3 times in my whole life, he says, "Get inside now." So I did, because you don't question that. That was serious. And so I step in, And I turn around as I'm coming in the screen door and look back. There's a skunk waddling right out onto the porch where I was. I'm allergic to animal musk, and I know this because I'm allergic to any type of perfume.
You're allergic to everything, Anna.
Yeah, I know. But animal musk has a particularly harsh effect on me, at least the type they use in perfume, which I don't think comes from skunks, but it is a musk. And I have no idea how skunk musk affects me, or at least how badly. I know I get a little teary-eyed and, watery nosed when I smell it, but I think everybody does. Right? And this is the thing. It didn't even stink. It just waddled out there. Like, we couldn't smell it until it was right there, or at least I couldn't. He might have. And then he scared it away and protected me from the thing that might have caused an allergic reaction, the wild animal that he didn't want around his wife, right? Which it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it is, because it could have had rabies. It could have been dangerous. He could have been sprayed, and he wasn't. But if he had been, the preserving end of it would have been that I would have taken care of him, even if I had to put a cloth over my face. I would have taken care of him. I wouldn't have laughed at his situation. I would have been compassionate because he's my husband and I love him, and I don't want him to feel bad about that. He just risked himself to protect me. And if something bad does happen to him, I take care of him. And he does his best to keep bad things from happening to me. But if something bad has happened to me, he takes care of me. And, if he had been sprayed and it looked funny or looked ridiculous or anything like that, I wouldn't tell you guys, because that's his reputation. And I might not have the same physical strength. I certainly can't. I can't lift him, but he can lift me, right? But I can protect his reputation.
You can preserve his reputation.
Preserve it. And that's what I would do under that circumstance. I really don't have anything to protect in terms of, like, his reputation doesn't really have any vulnerabilities. He's a good guy. He's pretty awesome. And don't tell me I'm biased. I married the handsomest guy in the world and the coolest guy in the world.
Whatever. I mean, that would be me, but whatever. He's the second.
Nope, that would be my husband.
Whatever.
But and I know every woman should be saying that, right? So that would cause the biggest argument among any women in our audience. But that's what should happen in a relationship. But if we're only training guys that it's their job to protect, and we're not training gals that it's our job to preserve and to protect in our own way, right? We're only training up half of the relationship, and that's like only building half of a bridge. The other half, if you don't have the other half, the minute that you get past the edge of the first half, you are falling into the river. And that's really why we have such a high divorce rate. And yeah, Zoomers, there's a lot of Zoomers that aren't married yet. I don't know, Senior Sticks, if you're a Zoomer or a millennial, but there's a lot of Zoomers that are pretty young. Although
I'm a millennial.
Are you a zillennial?
Yeah.
It's just called Zennials. I don't know. I might have that wrong.
Yeah.
But you're Zennial with a Z, right? Or are you Zennial with an X?
Yeah.
That means people were born in 1982, because I'm one of them too.
Okay.
Yeah, I was born in 1985.
Okay. Yeah, you guys are both quite a bit younger.
Yeah, we don't like identifying with millennials because most of them are fucking cucks.
Well, that's fair. And I probably millennials feel the same way about Zoomers, and Zoomers will feel the same way about Gen Alpha, and I think Boomers felt the same way about Gen X. But like there's Zoomers with an X at both ends of Gen X, because you have people who were on the cusp between Boomers and Gen X that have a lot of Boomer traits. I have family that's that age that's they act more like my parents' generation than mine, and And then, of course, there's Zoomers with an X that are the cusp of Gen X and millennials, and most of them act more like Gen Xers than they do millennials. So it makes sense that Zoomers with a or that Zennials would it's Zoomers with an X, Zennials with an X, and Zennials with a Z is what I'm thinking of. But it would make sense that Zennials with a Z would act more like millennials than Zoomers. So I wonder what they're going to call the cusp between Zoomers and Alpha.
It's called Generation Beta, but that's the main one. After Alpha is Generation Beta.
Yeah, but I mean the year that the Zoomer generation stops and Alpha starts, there's a cusp there. That's between.
Alpha starts at 2012 and stops at 2025.
Yeah, so
it's tempting to say it all changed when it all changed with the internet. Because
so that kids,
but it's not. It all changed. It all changed when feminism took over everything, which was at some point during the 80s. And so most of us during the 80s, like, we have an identity crisis on top of an identity crisis. We like, I for one do not like being crushed into this identity of millennial or Gen X or any of the above. Like, well, I reject your identity politics, whatsoever it is that you you try to encroach on me when it comes to identifying me as to exactly what fucking decade I was born. Like, none of this is important. I have far more in common with Gen X than I do with millennials. I have far more in common with boomers who I like than fucking Zoomers who I don't like. Like,
I didn't care about it much either until Zoomers started calling Gen Xers boomers because our generation doesn't exist. And then I had to think about it because, you had that slap fight that's been going on TikTok and YouTube between influencers of different ages.
Gen Z called older people grandpa.
Yeah. And well, I mean, they can call me grandpa or grandma if they want. I mean, I suppose some of them would call me grandpa, considering how often I get called a man. But my grandson is Gen Alpha, so there you go. But in any case, I had to think about it because there were similarities between Boomers and Gen X. We all played outside unsupervised. Went downtown with our friends at the age of 10 to 12 years old without parents coming with us and stuff like that. But the Boomer generation grew up being taught to duck and cover if a nuclear bomb was going to get dropped on their communities. And my generation, our moms were the first generation to, for whatever reason, decide that they all had to work, even if there wasn't a crisis. And so it was pretty common for there to be a whole neighborhood full of kids that were home alone from the time, school let out. You'd walk home from school, you'd let yourself in, and you'd be there for an hour before mom got home, possibly more before mom or dad got home. You were lucky if you had an older sibling there. But I was the older sibling, so that wasn't, and at my house, that wasn't the case. My mom was home. But most of my friends, either mom or dad or both, would not be home when they got home from school. And, almost all of them, dad wasn't home. So, until after 5 o'clock, sometimes later, depending on where he worked. And we talk about different things. Like, we were the last generation to get to do a lot of the running around outside on your bicycle without a parent outside watching you, going down the street to the park, getting into fights with other kids without somebody intervening, and stuff like that. And we were kind of raised, like they call it free range parenting now, like it's something new and novel, but the whole of Generation X was raised that way. And so it became something to, you can classify a group of people based on that. During this time frame, the culture supported these things. And so if you're Gen X, you can remember things like that. You knew at least one kid that had a keychain around their neck, like usually it was on a shoestring or something. And you also knew at least one mom that pulled the strings out of the hoods of all of her kids' coats because she didn't want them to get strangled on the slide at the park, because she wasn't going to be there.
I like to think of us as the Calvin generation and the post-Calvin generation. Anyone who's ever read Calvin and Hobbes will know.
Okay, I was wondering if you're going with Calvin.
I am going with Calvin and Hobbes. Those of us who were allowed to just wander off into the woods and play with their imaginary pet tiger.
Yeah,
and that was the cutoff. Doesn't matter when you were born. It was if you were allowed to just go off into the wilderness and just live your life as a child. And, at some point that changed. And it was at some point during the 90s. You know what I mean?
Yep. And a lot of things led to that change. I mean, we had changes in population, changes in crime rate, a lot of Gen Xers, a lot of Gen X women did the helicopter parenting thing, which is, as one of our commenters here, I think it was Art Fours, helicopter parenting is deeply feminine. And those were changes that took place, I think largely because the living environment was changing as the population grew and so on. But and also you sort of had, I think Gen X had less faith that our kids would follow our rules than the boomer generation had that we would follow theirs, partly because we didn't employ the same harsh degree of discipline. Like a lot of us, I don't think I ever had to spank any of the kids. Well, I couldn't have spanked the girls because they were my stepdaughters, so that would have been illegal anyway. But my son, when he was younger, you just redirected him, right? You didn't have to use any kind of harsh discipline most of the time. And when he got older, he understood being told, having things explained to him. I didn't have to say because I said so, because if I actually said the real reason why I was telling him to do something, he got it. And he understood the command voice too. And that's a sign of danger, and I better do what mom says and ask questions later, right? Or I better do what dad says and ask questions later. So we didn't have quite the level of, you're grounded, you're getting a spanking, you're standing in a corner and all that kind of thing to deal with. But at the same time, I think a lot of parents didn't think their kids could be trusted to avoid strangers, right? And then at the same time, the millennial generation was probably the last generation to have real freedom on the internet as kids, because I raised a Zoomer. My son is a Zoomer. My daughters are millennials. They're not that far apart from each other, but they're far enough from the cusp that it's enough. It's a difference. Like you can tell there's a bit of a difference. And at my house, we didn't have privacy on the internet for the kids. If they were on a computer, it faced us. If they were doing stuff on their phones. They were in the living room with us. They weren't off in a corner somewhere talking to somebody that could get them in danger. And I think that for my daughter's generation, that was kind of unusual. But for my son's generation, that was becoming more the norm, because you kind of know there's too many. Well, and of course, if you were an early adopter of internet use, you already knew that you couldn't trust strangers on the internet to talk to your child. But yeah, each generation has their thing that they realize is more dangerous than their parents realized when they were kids. And so each generation becomes more protected than the last, and more. But I think half the reason why Gen X and Gen Z are at each other's throats is that Gen X is largely the parents of Gen Z, where with millennials, there's a significant portion of them that are the younger siblings of Gen Xers. So there you go. And yes, Art Force, the 14.4 modem that took forever to load a web page that was nothing but one color of text on a single color of screen. But in any case, yes, and Mangaka 92 mentions the Satanic Panic doing a huge number, and I think you're right there too. All of the concerns over comics and rock and roll and games and movies and TV, when the real answer is very, very simple. You teach your children right from wrong and smart from foolish, and they won't be susceptible to those influences if those influences are bad. And if you don't teach them, even if you eliminate all of those influences, there will be something that will come along and corrupt them and damage them. But unfortunately, it took 2 generations of panic over entertainment media of various types and daycare centers of all things to fix that. For people to understand that. And I don't even know if parents understand that today. But in any case, I think we're going to call it a show. It's 20 after 9, and we got to get into the after show. I will continue with this article next week. And Richard, you are more than 100% welcome to come back next week if you're available.
Yeah. I spent all my childhood in daycares for the most part.
Oh geez, yeah.
So from like 1 to 5, and then from 5 to 11.
That's a lot of time in daycare, yeah. Actually, I think a lot.
It was like certain, like you had daycare for infants. Mm-hmm. Then you had like after school clubs for like 8 to 11-year-olds. So
a lot of millennials had that experience.
I'm guessing you had your hobs as well. You had your pet tiger. You had your fluffy animal that you thought of as a tiger that was alive, right? That was the transitional period where we still had our imaginations and we could still indulge in those imaginations before the government forced us to take a bunch of fucking medication that made us forget that we had ever had a fluffy toy that we imagined was a real tiger.
Oddly enough, they didn't put me on.
Oh, go ahead.
Oddly enough, they didn't put me on medication for my autism at the time. So.
Yeah, they started.
We will bring back Hobbes, ladies and gentlemen. If it fucking kills me, we will bring back the Hobbes that every Calvin deserves.
We could talk about the medication thing quite a bit. Not tonight, but just briefly. I remember when I was in school, when I was going through, I had like one kid in my class that was on Ritalin. When I was in junior high that I knew of. Or well, he was a year ahead of me. I was in the 7th grade. He was in the 8th grade. But one kid that I knew of that was on Ritalin. And by the time 2 years later, my brother was that age, there were several, but it was still, like a handful out of 150 kids in the class. And by the time my son was in school, most of his classmates, like he was in the minority because he was not on Ritalin and he was not on a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So, like those were the two big things. They either need to calm you down or they need to undepress you. And like he just grew up normally. Like we didn't have to do any of that stuff. And we weren't, if somebody had come to me and said we needed to, I would have been very, very pushy about no, because most kids don't need those drugs. There would have had to be a real serious issue that merited medication, right? But by that time, it was pretty normal for most of the students in the class to be medicated with something. Ritalin, Adderall was another one that was really commonly used. Multiple different selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. A few kids in junior high age, antipsychotics, not just anti-anxiety meds. Kids with diagnoses that you used to only hear neurotic middle-aged women, getting after their kids moved out of the house, right? And stuff like that. So it's definitely a big change over the generations with that. But with that, I will thank everybody for listening. I thank all my co-hosts for going over this garbage with us. and I will call it garbage because I write better stuff than this. So that entitles me to call it garbage. Thanks very much, Brian, for working in the background to make sure that we can do this. And good night, all.
Good night.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.